Hey friends, I'm Casey and this is Let's Tell Their Story. In the United States alone, over the past 40 years, over 200,000 cases have gone unsolved. Whether that be missing persons, unsolved murders, or unsolved suspicious deaths, I'm here to tell you the stories about the cases that were never solved. I hope I can bring light to these cold cases that just sit and collect dust. I go through every case with as much research as I possibly can and give you the knowledge that I was able to find. So grab your warmest blanket, find a comfy spot to relax, and let me tell you a story. If you're doing chores like washing dishes, laundry, or even at work, it's okay. You can listen to Story Time. Okay, so my plan is to have a multi-parter this time around. It's probably going to be about 3 parts. There is 3 young ladies that need to be brought back up into the spotlight. They were all featured in the Showtime docuseries Murder in Bighorn. So you might recognize the names Henny Leslie Scott, Selena Shelley Faye Not Afraid, and Case Sarah Stops Pretty Places are going to be my focuses throughout these episodes. So there's a flame needs to be lit for people to wake up and see what is happening to our Indigenous men and especially our Indigenous women. I did not realize how much severity needs to be brought up and how bad this has gotten to be. But with this first episode, I'm going to basically be focusing on their tribes, the Crow tribe and the Cheyenne tribe, for us just to get a background on how the Cheyenne and the Crow tribe became part of the Bighorn area and why the injustices are actually out there. According to Montana Department of Justice, Indigenous people in Montana alone make up 30% of all missing persons. As of January of this year, 45 Indigenous people are missing just in Montana, with 22 of them being under 18 and 2 of them as young as 5 years old. Since each of the girls has Cheyenne or Crow tribal heritage, the background, I'm going to start out with the Crow tribe and then I'll work into the Cheyenne tribe. So there's a lot of, I want to say, similarities and differences between the tribes, but the history is very similar for both of them. So with the Crow tribe, the Hidasta tribe originated from the Lake Winnipeg area, probably in Manitoba, Canada. According to historians, the Hidasta tribe can be dated as far back as the 1300s and as far south as the headwaters of the Mississippi River, or better known as the Gulf of Mexico. The Crow tribe actually began as part of the Hidasta people, where they were enemies with the Blackfeet, the Soy, and the Cheyenne tribes. But they were allies with the Shoshone, Flathead, and the Mandan. Yet they would have their squabbles with the Shoshones from time to time, but they would sometimes do some trading with their allies. The Hidasta tribe had gone through 3 transitions. The first, they were people of the earth. This is where animals could talk and people and animals were one with humans. The next transition, they lived more as we think of Indigenous people, as fishermen, hunters, gatherers. And then their last and final transition, they would become farmers, yet they retained their survival skills of the fishermen, hunter, and gatherers. In the early 1600s, a prominent tribal leader known as No Vitals had a vision that his people needed to go west to the Rocky Mountains looking for a sacred tobacco plant. He believed that the tobacco plant's seeds would give his people special identity and make them strong. They believed the tobacco played an important role in their survival. Only men could smoke the tobacco, and it was with really strict rules to the practice. It was the only crop that the tribe ever cultivated, and they believed it had the ability to influence events in the natural world. So somewhere during either the mid-1600s or early 1700s, roughly 500 of the Hadasta people separated from the Hadastas to follow Chief Novitel's vision and began their migration near Yellowstone River. Southern Montana, northern Wyoming. This would be where the former lifestyles favored that of the typical Great Plains existence. Following the movements of the great buffalo herds, they lived in hide-covered teepees and they hunted game in their new homeland. This is also where the tribe took on a new name as Crow. By the early 1800s, the Crow tribe possessed more horses than any other tribe east of the Rockies, which immensely helped with traveling, hunting, and warfare, because before the horses, they used tame dogs to carry and pull belongings when they traveled. Each Crow household averaged anywhere between 20 and 60 animals. These animals would become vital after the Crow tribe encountered Meriwether Lewis and William Clark in 1806. Same names sound familiar? Where a large group of Native Americans and whites gathered near Bismarck, North Dakota. Their more fur traders would arrive in the Crow territory and build forts and trading posts soon after Lewis and Clark's expedition. Fur traders weren't the only ones that felt the need to invade the Crow territory. The Sioux and the Blackfeet tribes moved in on the Crow territory also, and the Crows weren't really ones to start wars, and they were usually outnumbered by other tribes that invaded their territory. They usually got their retaliation by stealing horses. While in the 1850s, the white settlers began to streamline into Crow territory. Not often, but at times, the Crow tribe would conduct raids on the newcomers, but their relationship with the white people were mostly peaceful, which was a good thing for them to have a more peaceful relationship with the whites, since the two most powerful chiefs of the Crow tribe had gotten into a disagreement in 1825, and the Crow broke into two main groups. Chief Longhair had the Mountain Crow in high country south of Yellowstone River, while Chief Arapush had the River Crow crew north of Yellow River. Side note, here, so in order to become a chief, they would have to earn their position by completing 4 feats. And those were to lead a successful raid on an enemy tribe, to capture an enemy's horses, take away a weapon from an enemy that was still alive, and be the first member of a war party to touch an enemy with a coup stick. They would call that practice counting coup. There were usually more than one chief that served as a political leader, and they usually demonstrated leadership abilities, influenced over spirits, public speaking, and were usually generous. The chiefs were usually to blame for times of bad luck. Then, when they'd have a period of bad luck, the tribe would just agree on a new chief. Since they were mostly peaceful with the whites, in 1850s, wars and a smallpox epidemic almost wiped out the Crow population. So to save their tribe, they signed the Fort Laramie Treaty in 1851. And it wasn't just the Crow tribe that signed the Fort Laramie Treaty. From the research I've done, it looks like it's all of the indigenous tribes actually ended up having to sign this treaty. And basically what the treaty was is, as long as the indigenous people would settle peacefully on a reservation in Montana, The treaty would give them 38.5 million acres to settle on, and that included southern Montana, northern Wyoming, and western South Dakota. A second treaty by the same name was signed and established in 1868 that would now include reservation territory south of Yellowstone River. In the late 1800s, another vision came to a Crow leader. This time it was leader Plentycoos, that the tribe needed to cooperate with the whites for their own survival. He insisted that the Crow warriors become allies with the U.S. Army troops in several battles against enemy tribes, which they did. They fought alongside American soldiers against Nez Perce and the Sioux in the 1870s, and I believe that's the War of 1877. And they acted as scouts for Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer at the Battle of Little Bighorn. Even though the Crow tribe cooperated with the whites, it didn't really earn them any more respect or better treatment than any other tribe that the whites battled with. But with the Allied protection they had from the U.S. Army, it just may have saved them from the Sioux tribe, eliminating the Crow tribe altogether. While you would think this was a good thing, in many ways it was, yet just 20 years after the gold rush of 1860, miners, trappers, and settlers began to move in once again on the Crow territory. They established forts and built railroads and even slaughtered the buffalo in large quantity, that the herds ended up disappearing, and that the traditional way of life came to disappear for the Crow people. With the buffalo gone, the Crows were without their main source of clothing and food, so now they're dependent on the U.S. government agencies for their survival, and over the next few decades, that 38.5 million acres would be reduced down to a measly 2.3 million acres by 1905. Traditional Native ceremonies and practices would become prohibited by federal laws and Christian schools that established themselves onto the Crow reservation. The reasoning behind the decline in land was that the whites were trying to force the Native Americans to be more like the white people and do things the white people way. So the Allotment Act of 1887 basically split the land up into plots, and what was left over was basically white folks' settlement for farming. And with the allotment, they were broke down into plots where it was understood that the tribes would also be farming the land, but the Crow people weren't interested in farming, so they would sell off their allotment land on the reservation to the whites. So over time, the 38.5 million acres became 2.3 million acres, and the territory of the Crow people was now intertwined of native and non-native parcels. But this wasn't about to defeat the Crow people. While still in the late 1800s, Chief Plentycoos would head off to Washington, D.C., where he made actually really good contacts with important people and dabbled in dealings with the white government. And Chief Plentycoos was a smart cookie, or I should say a conniving little shit. So he would demand aid for his people, and if that government official wouldn't listen to him, he'd go to that government official's rival, and the rival would usually be more than happy to pay attention. And this was also where Chief Plentycoos learned that Christian churches and local merchants came to the Native Americans' defense when the Crow people spoke about government officials cheating them. In 1911, Robert Yellowtail, which is actually Chief Robert Yellowtail, he formed a business committee for all the tribe's official business in the 1920s, though the business committee was eventually replaced with a general council. The general council constituted of all adult members of the tribe, and they elected 4 official members. The general council attendees would become active participants against the government right along with their elected leaders. So in 1934, the white government, or the U.S. government, had a great idea. They're going to start a new act. This one being called Indian Reorganization Act, which basically let the Crow leaders write their own constitution. But, of course, there's got to be a catch. It was only to be written under the supervision of the federal government. The Crow people and leaders basically gave the U.S. government, or the federal government, a big FU, and they remained independent. While Chief Robert Yellowtail did think a constitution wasn't such a bad idea, in 1948, the Crow people developed their own constitution, and with their constitution, they were in control of their affairs, and they were able to practice their native religion and go back to following traditional ways without fear of criticism. In 2001, their constitution was revised, and the new constitution now included 3 branches: the executive, legislative, and judicial, and they lengthened their office terms from 2 to 4 years. So it would provide more equality with the U.S. government. You'd think that would be the end of the back and forth between the Crow tribe and the federal government. Nope, far from it. In the 1950s, the U.S. government forced the Crow tribe to sell their land rights to Big Horn Canyon because they wanted to build a dam. While Chief Robert Yellowtail was strongly against the dam when the project was completed, it was named no other than Yellowtail Dam and Reservoir after Chief Robert Yellowtail. Federal government monies have helped the Native people with education, health, and housing programs since the reservation isn't only home to the Crow people, but several thousand non-natives that the Crow had to lease and sell their land to. And this is how the laws between the reservation and the federal and state laws, they all get convoluted, because in Bighorn County and the reservation in general, it's a jurisdictional nightmare. So on to figuring out the jurisdictions on tribal lands, it's the FBI and the Bureau of Indian Affairs, or the BIA, that have that authority, but the BIA doesn't have jurisdiction over non-natives that commit crimes on tribal lands. And the FBI waits until they are invited in by local authorities. So I think that Lucy Rain Simpson, the executive director of the National Indigenous Women's Resource Center, said it best. And I'm going to quote her here. To figure out who has jurisdiction at any given time, you have to know: who is the victim? Are they Indian or not? Who is the perpetrator? Are they Indian or not? Where did the crime occur? On Indian land or not? So now that with the history of the Crow tribe, I'm going to go into the Cheyenne tribe and the comparisons, and then I'll wrap this up. And then next week, we'll go into the girls. The Cheyenne story is a lot about relocation. They were constantly forced west in search of food and the pressures of other tribes that were also being pushed west by the expansion of the European Americans. The Cheyenne originated from the Great Lakes area, or present-day Minnesota, and they began their move west because of other tribes that had obtained guns from the Europeans to take their land. They began their journey settling in the Dakotas, both the north and south, and they were later forced into the Black Hills of South Dakota and Wyoming. Then in the early 1800s, the tribe actually split into two, being the Northern Cheyenne and the Southern Cheyenne. When some of the Cheyenne moved to Colorado along the Arkansas River, and as we discussed with the Crow tribe, they weren't the only ones suffering the loss of the buffalo herds. It also affected the Cheyenne tribe as well. So again, I bring up the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1851. It was the federal government's way of saying, I'm going to safeguard the white settlers, and here's some annual money for your losses of buffalo and land. Then in late 1800s, both the northern and southern Cheyenne were sent to reservations in Oklahoma. The northern Cheyenne said, nah, they decided to flee to Nebraska, and later they would move to Montana, and Montana, South Dakota, and Oklahoma would basically become their forever homes. While they were in the Great Plains, they united with the Sutayo tribe the Sutayo tribe they had also been forced out of the Great Lakes, but the Cheyenne became the closest allies with the Arapaho, which are what I gather more in the Oklahoma area rather than the Montana area, and I apologize if I pronounced that wrong. I know it seems like I'm jumping around a lot with dates, but there's a lot, so hopefully you're able to follow along. So let's go back to that Fort Laramie Treaty for a few moments. So the whole deal with this treaty, other than land for farming, was so that the United States could build roads and military posts on the Native American territories, and it was an agreement to stop fighting among themselves, as in the Native American tribes to stop fighting against each other and to stop attacking the white settlers. Well, by 1856, the aggravation began again with the number of whites crossing into Native American territory, or present-day Oklahoma. So from 1857 to 1879, a war broke out between the Cheyenne and the U.S. government army. I am going to give a quick trigger warning here because things are going to get really ugly. So the trigger warning is about mutilation. So if you don't want to hear, skip ahead about 2 minutes. The Southern Cheyenne chief, Black Kettle, was trying to secure peace with honor for his people, and he signed a treaty that gave all their land to the United States, except a small portion in southern Colorado, which Sand Creek Reservation. But there wasn't enough land for all of the Native Americans, so many of the young Cheyenne men stole livestock and goods from the nearby white settlers just to survive. So when they got caught doing this, Chief Black Kettle talked with the local military commander about it, and he was basically told, keep your people on Sand Creek Reservation and they'll stay safe. However, on November 29th, 1884, the tribe lay sleeping at their camp at Sand Creek, and Colonel John M. Chivington and his Colorado volunteers came into camp, where they proceeded to slaughter 105 women and children and 28 men. They mercilessly attacked the women, beheaded the children, and dismembered the elderly. Chief Black Kettle did what he could, and he rode into the gunfire waving an American flag to let these assholes know that they were under the protection of the American government. But Colonel Chivington and his volunteers didn't give two shits. They set the Native Americans' horses loose across the plains, and then they set the settlement on fire. Since only 9 soldiers were killed and 38 were wounded of this colonel's attack and his volunteers, these asshole soldiers, they gallivanted through the streets of Denver, displaying their victims' body parts on the ends of their daggers as displays. So after the Sand Creek Massacre, the U.S. Congress held a series of hearings, and they formally condemned the event and the men in charge of the massacre. Didn't catch that in my history books. So remember that 1876 Battle of Little Bighorn that I mentioned earlier with the Crow tribe being scouts with Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer? Well, the Cheyenne tribe, they were not on the scouting for Custer or even allied with the U.S. troops. On the contrary, they were on the other side fighting alongside the Sioux Sioux tribe, where they defeated Custer. The U.S. troops were pretty shitty losers. They decided to get retaliation and rounded up the Northern Cheyenne that participated in the battle and forced them to move to the Cheyenne Reservation in Oklahoma. The Northern Cheyenne people, they didn't care for their new home, and they missed their homeland and found the conditions of the reservation unbearable. So in 1878, they said enough of this and started escaping north. But once again, the ill treatment and gunfire by the soldiers perished many of the Cheyenne that were trying to flee. The ones that did survive were sent to Montana, and in 1884, they were given a small reservation of their own. In the 1880s, with the buffalo herds almost extinct, the Cheyenne, just like the Crow people, were dependent on the government for food, shelter, and clothing. So state officials in both Oklahoma and Montana introduced cattle raising and wanted the Cheyenne to become ranchers. However, U.S. officials didn't like the idea of ranchers. They wanted the Cheyenne tribe to become farmers. Neither plan proved to be successful. So since the U.S. government needed to have their noses up in everyone's buttholes, religious ceremonies weren't something they were going to have if it didn't follow the white settlers' ways. Since the Cheyenne people believed that everything was direct descendants from God, that all people, animals, and plants all had spirits, they would pray to the spirits of the earth when they planted and harvested corn to have good crops, have herbs provided, and heal the sick with ritual ceremonies. This would consist of 8 days. With the first 4, they would build a dance lodge and perform secret rites in a lone teepee. And the last 4 consisted of a public dance held in the lodge they had built called the Sundance Lodge. Well, you can imagine in the late 1800s, the U.S. government put a kibosh to the Sundance. The Cheyenne, they kept performing the ceremony, only they renamed it Willow Dance. And in 1911, the U.S. government, the Willow Dance was forbidden. Even after repeated efforts to reinstate the dance by the Cheyenne, it was rejected. So getting into the more organized government of the Cheyenne people, it's called the Council of 44, and they would meet annually during the summer. It consisted of 44 men that were elected from 10 Cheyenne groups, and they would serve a 10-year term. The chiefs would discuss problems within the tribe and how to deal with other tribes. All of the chiefs shared power, so no one chief had absolute power, and all the decisions had to be unanimous. But like the Crow tribe, by the mid-2000s, the Cheyenne had changed their dynamics of their tribal council, and it would now be made of 1 president and 24 council members. Council members are elected to 2-year terms from 5 separate districts, and the president serves a 4-year term. However, the Cheyenne still believe in making their decisions by consensus. There is so much more to both these tribes that I could go on for days on the histories of both of them, but I'm not here to just tell you stories of the history of indigenous tribes. I'm here to tell you the stories of unjust, unsolved, and the missing. Henny, Selena, and Kaysera need a voice, and they're not alone in Bighorn that need voices. My contribution here is just a small voice, so let's all start screaming loudly for our indigenous men and women that need voices to be loud. No wonder we have a misconception of our indigenous. I don't know about you, but I wasn't taught this in my history classes. I was taught how Thanksgiving came to be, Pocahontas, and skin-hide clothing and teepees. Not the hells these tribes have been through within the history of the United States, and the hell we've put our indigenous people through, it doesn't sound united to me. So next week, We'll be going into the cases of the young women, Henny and Selena. Case Sarah will probably be the third and final episode, and it will all make sense in the end why I'm doing it, the order I'm doing it in. So I will talk to you next week, and as cliche as this has become, it really is something to remember. See something, say something. You never know who you may be saving. Please, just don't be part of the bystander effect. Hey friends, I'm Casey, and this is Let's Tell Their Story. In the United States alone, over the past 40 years, over 200,000 cases have gone unsolved. Whether that be missing persons, unsolved murders, or unsolved suspicious deaths, I'm here to tell you the stories about the cases that were never solved. I hope I can bring light to these cold cases that just sit and collect dust. I go through every case with as much research as I possibly can and give you the knowledge that I was able to find. So grab your warmest blanket, find a comfy spot to relax, and let me tell you a story. If you're doing chores like washing dishes, laundry, or even at work, it's okay. You can listen to Story Time. On January 9th, 2004, in Crow Agency, Montana, Paula Castro Stops and Charles Scott Jr. welcomed a little girl into their family. They named her Henrietta Leslie Scott, and to her family, she was known as Henny. Henny was one of seven siblings between her mother and father that had separated, and with that, she had 2 adopted sisters and 4 brothers, a stepmom, Nema Allen Scott, and a stepfather, Nathan Stops. Henny was known for her outgoing attitude and made friends anywhere she went. Henny began her young school days of Head Start and middle school at Lame Deer and St. Libre Indian schools. She was an honor roll student, always bringing home a ribbon for that accomplishment. She joined a cheering camp and would cheer at local football games during the game's halftime shows. Those were the performances where you could best see a shining light from Henny. And this was at Odom Elementary in Edroy, Texas, where she was proud to be an Odom Owl. Now, how does an outgoing, friendly cheerleader born in Montana end up in Texas? Well, for this live-spirited young lady, the family moved to Edroy to help with the decline of her maternal grandfather, Felix, who sadly passed away on October 30th, 2013. Unfortunately, this would just be the beginning of heartache to come to the family. The following October, in 2014, Henny would feel the heart-wrenching agony of losing her brother CJ when she was just 10 years old. The family would be heading back to Montana, where Henny attended Hardin and Lame Deer schools for junior high and high school. Although she wasn't on the cheer squad, her flamboyant voice could be heard from any place she may have been sitting in the bleachers while attending basketball games. Basketball was something Henny enjoyed so much that she played her 8th grade year and was anxious to be playing her freshman year of high school. Henny was a young lady with interests all over the place. She enjoyed singing and dancing, hunting with her family, and obviously basketball. Henny didn't just get good grades to be on the honor roll. She had an aspiration to one day become a doctor. Her mother, Paula, was an EMT for the is an EMT for the Northern Cheyenne Ambulance Service. As of February of this year was the last article I had seen, so she probably still is an EMT for the Northern Cheyenne Ambulance. Henny would look through Paula's EMT books, learning how to do things such as how to perform CPR or how to treat an injury. Unfortunately, this family, for Paula, she doesn't seem to get a break from heartache, because on December 7th, 2018, Henny never made it home. Henny's story isn't one of pleasantries, though. I I want to add in here that there are a couple differing stories as to where Henny had been on December 7th. I've read and heard through other podcasts and news outlets that the most common story is that Henny was at a friend's house that Paula wasn't wanting Henny to hang out with. And when Henny called to ask to stay there, Paula informed Henny that she was grounded and that she needed to get her butt back home. And also, Paula referred to this particular friend's home being known as the party place. And then there is the other story that comes up that Henny's school only had half days on Fridays and that she wanted to go to a basketball game with her friends in Billings. And again, when she called to ask Paula said, no, get your butt home, you're grounded. And the one consistency in both of these stories is that Henny was grounded even though there are rumors and speculations that people had seen Henny at that basketball game in Billings. However, that's never been confirmed or denied. When Henny failed to come home, Paula and Nathan were very concerned and they went looking for their daughter. They began at the friend's home, the party place, and Nathan was told that they didn't even know her. They called other friends, but no one had seen Henny. Paula and Nathan looked into Henny's social media accounts and they had all gone silent. After extensive searching from Henny's parents, Paula and Nate went to authorities to report Henny missing. But like so many other non-Caucasian ethnicities, she wasn't put into the registry of missing persons and no Amber Alert was put out. It wouldn't be until almost 2 weeks later that the authorities would take 14-year-old Henny's disappearance seriously, because now she hadn't disappeared. Her body was found. While the authorities took their time to take things seriously, Henny's loved ones weren't wasting any time. They gathered local volunteers and orchestrated their own search parties in hopes to find Henny. They had even reached out to the public for anyone that had any information to come forward so they could bring their little girl home. And like I stated, 20 days of fear, exhaustion, panic, and silence would all turn to tears on December 27th when Henny's snow-covered deceased little body would be found less than 200 yards from the party place. Authorities now were taking things seriously, and they wasted no time getting to the scene or transporting Henny's sweet little body off for an autopsy. Autopsy reports and the police investigation came back quickly with her cause of death to be that of accidental hypothermia, and no signs of foul play. Authorities said that the accidental hypothermia was probably due to the fact that when Henny's body was found, she had very light clothing on, and that played a factor. This did not sit well with Henny's family. They definitely believed that foul play was involved. To begin with, when Henny was found, her parents noted that they had seen several bruises on Henny's body, and the clothes she was wearing weren't hers. Moms know their kids' clothes. They even stated that Henny wasn't someone that would put herself in harm's way unless she was forced or lured by someone with evil intentions. Even with the community not believing the no foul play, the police were asked, and the community asked the police to restart the investigation and look further into Henny's case, which they really didn't. And then the Montana Department of Justice stepped in and announced that no federal charges were going to be filed in Henny's case. Henny's family believed so strongly that she didn't die from hypothermia that they went against their Northern Cheyenne tribal customs and had Henny exhumed for a second autopsy, hoping to get answers. Henny's second autopsy revealed the minor discoloration that occurs to the body after death. It revealed no suggestions of insect bites, blunt force trauma, sexual abuse, or drug use, and also came to the same conclusion that Henny died of accidental hypothermia. As for Nate, him and Paula are no longer together. Nate is currently serving a 2-year prison sentence for pleading guilty of having sexual relations with a minor from the time the minor was 14 to the time she was 16. While Nate spends his time in prison, Paula continues to try and get the justice that Henny deserves, whether that be organizing vigils, volunteer groups, or even the fact that she went against her own cultural beliefs and had Henny exhumed for a second autopsy. Even though Henny is no longer physically with her family, Paula and the Montana residents of Lame Deer keep Henny alive in their hearts. On to Selena. Selena Shelley Faye Not Afraid and her twin sister Zoe were the youngest of 5 siblings, born either June 8th or June 18th, 2003. I've seen June 8th more often than the 18th, but I have seen the 18th in a few differing sources. To Jackie Big Hair and Leroy Not Afraid. Selena was described as being a spirited, bubbly person, but the shyer of the twins. Selena went to high school in Hardin, Montana, where she was involved in volleyball, basketball, and horse riding. Selena wanted to become an Indian relay rider and to one day own her own farm, as riding horses was one of her biggest passions. I looked up that Indian relay riding, and it is really interesting to watch. I've seen horse races and stuff, but it's horse racing on a whole nother level, and the physicalness that you have to have with that is just amazing to watch. So if you get a chance, look it up. Selena lived with her family on the Crow Reservation in Bighorn County, just southwest of Billings. Selena was known to be very creative. She loved to sew and create different beadwork, as it was a huge part of her family. Although Selena was a bubbly person per se, it wasn't because life had dealt her rainbows and lollipops. On the contrary. In 2013, at the tender age of 11, Selena's twin sister Zoe took her own life. It has been said that Zoe had been bullied so badly that she could no longer handle it. Then in 2017, Selena lost her brother Preston in a fatal shooting and had been shot by a Billings police officer at just 23 years old. Also, that same year, Selena's sister Tristan was killed in a hit and run. I have also lost a sibling, so how this girl stayed bubbly is beyond me, with the loss of 3 siblings passing that closely together. Granted, when my brother passed away, it wasn't under foul play circumstances by no means. This now left Selena and her brother RJ as the only remaining children of the Not Afraid family. Selena had been invited to a New Year's Eve house party in Billings that she was more than happy to say yes to, and even her family allowed her to go with the assumption that she would return the very next day. As many house parties go, it was a night of partying and drinking. As Selena and her friends were heading back to Hardin on January 1st, 2020, the van they were driving began to have vehicle issues, and they pulled into a rest area off of I-90 between Hardin and Billings. And this is where Selena ends up just vanishing into thin air. Around 2 p.m. that afternoon is when they're on their way home. There are multiple different stories, theories, and reported accounts of what happened to Selena at that rest area on that day. The most reported account is that when the van pulled into the rest area, Selena got out and began to walk into a nearby field and vanished into thin air. Another account states that there were 7 people total in the van, 5 20-year-old men and one other girl named Arlana besides Selena. and that the guys fixed the van just enough, but that the driver of the van told the girls he was going to call his mom and have his mom come get the girls, and for their own safety, that they needed to stay at the rest area, and his mom would come and get them. Then there was Snapchat footage of two of the men arguing with the hood up of the van up with a panoramic view of the area, and Selena is in the distance in the Snapchat video. Another account was that the guys stopped the vehicle and told the girls to get out and find their own ways home from there. There are a lot of accounts of what happened since all the men were questioned, but none of the other stories came close to matching one another's. The only part of their questioning and their stories that stayed consistent was the fact that the van had car trouble. So with each questioning, the story of Selena's fate was constantly changing. When the driver's mother showed up to the rest area, she looked all over and she couldn't find the girls. Eventually, she found Arlana, and Arlana was crouched down in a ditch, and she had scratches all over her body, and she wasn't wearing any shoes. And Arlana had no recollection of what happened, other than that Selena took off running into a nearby field, but she didn't know where Selena went to. When Selena's mother, Jackie, found out and was informed that Selena was missing, she pretty much packed up her RV and she went to that rest stop where she didn't leave for a while. Well, and I'll get to where and when she finally leaves with the RV from the rest stop. So this is the one time that law enforcement didn't waste any time putting together search parties to search the surrounding areas of the rest stop. If the police had it to do a thorough search with, they used it. So they used sniffer dogs, helicopters, they put together search parties of volunteers from fire departments, police departments, and whatnot. They even had drones that they had flown over the area, but Selena was nowhere to be found. Selena's family pulled in an RV into the rest area, which I had already said, and they continued to do their search on their own, since many of the original search party people were volunteers. They had lives and jobs that they needed to get back to. Cheryl Horn, Selena's aunt, not biological aunt, but adopted aunt, is reported saying there was a contradictory prayer that was being said with the family. And the prayer goes, "Please, Lord, please let us find her. Lord, please don't let me find her." They wanted her found, but didn't want to be the one to find her. When the FBI finally showed up, the family felt a little relief that they finally moved the RV out of the rest area, because they now had put it into the FBI's hands. And on January 20th, 2020, Selena was found frozen to the ground 200 feet from the road. According to the family, where Selena was found had been searched by the search parties, by the helicopter, by the drones, and by the family for days. She wasn't there, and she just showed up. She was found in a fairly open area 200 feet from the road. When the authorities found Selena, it appeared to them that Selena wasn't dressed for extreme cold, and it wouldn't take long for the autopsy to come back with cause of death, accidental hypothermia. Yep, exactly what you're thinking. Wasn't that what Henny's cause of death was? Yep, sure was. And just like Henny's family, Selena's wasn't taking hypothermia as an explanation either. They wanted to know how so many people could be searching in the exact area that Selena was found within the first few days of her missing, that no one saw her. They are convinced that something more sinister happened to her somewhere else, and she was placed back there where she would eventually be found. Since the autopsy report stated that there were no signs of physical or sexual abuse, the law enforcement of Bighorn County were quick to close the investigation, declaring it an accident. People in Bighorn County were not happy about the investigation being closed, and rumors and allegations began to run wild. At one point, police had learned that Selena's father, Leroy, was previously accused of sexually abusing Selena, that the Bighorn County started to think that Leroy was involved in Selena's disappearance. It wouldn't take Leroy long after the incident for him to become the undersheriff of Bighorn County, and he quickly recused himself from the investigation. So the reason why Leroy quickly recused himself from the investigation was with the allegations that were out. Jackie had gotten a protective order, or otherwise a restraining order, against Leroy. So even because when Leroy and Jackie separated, Leroy had custody of Selena for a while. Then the allegations came out, and Jackie took Selena back. And with the protection order, Leroy didn't want to interfere and cross his line, even though it was his daughter that was missing. And I just wanted to throw that in because that's why he recused himself. And it's not like he was a dad that just didn't care, which is possible, but I'm not one to say which way. I don't know Leroy, I don't know Jackie. I'm just getting Henny and Selena's voices out there because they don't have their voice anymore and they need to be heard. Police stood by their handling of Selena's case, and that hypothermia was the only logical explanation, and that the local residents are very aware of the harsh dangers that pose a threat to their estate. So with hypothermia being declared as Selena's manner of death, it gave Leroy a sense of relief knowing no foul play was involved. It has allowed him to keep his position as undersheriff of Bighorn County to this day. I have my thoughts, you probably have your thoughts, but I'm not going into it. We'll just all have our thoughts. Since now we're all either bawling or heated with emotion, there are some things that did take place during the investigation that just didn't fit in until now. Remember the New Year's party that began all of this all? Well, the police did do a search of the van and had found open bottles of alcohol. And after they looked further into it, they learned that Deandra Pittman was the one that invited Selena. And it was also her home that they had the party at. Pittman had encouraged Selena to drink that night. And in December of 2020, almost a year later, Pittman was charged with one count of endangering the welfare of children. It's not really clear as to whether that's because she gave and encouraged Selena to drink alcohol, or that she didn't ensure that Selena got home safely the next day. Some members of Selena's family hold on to hope that one day the truth of Selena's death will be answered, even if the police have closed her case as an accident. Now, I have a few questions that I'm just a little baffled with dates. So, wasn't November, December of 2019 when COVID was kind of starting to hit? And weren't we going into masking up, not going to our families? I fortunately at the time was considered an essential worker, so I still had my job, but my life had changed just like everybody else's did. And I remember wearing masks to work. I remember having to change my clothes before I walked in the door, just because I was in nursing. And I'm just a little baffled as to why were they still throwing a house party for New Year's if everything, pretty much the whole country had shut down. Hell, damn near the whole world had shut down by this time. So it just, that's the only thing that bothers me with this case, is that we had a major epidemic going on, and we have just random New Year's parties because we're not taking it seriously yet. That's just my opinion. I'm just throwing it in there. I'm sorry. So Henny, Selena, and K. Sarah, they need a voice, and they're not alone in Bighorn that need voices. And I know I said this last time, and I'm going to repeat myself again next week of this. My contribution here is just a small voice, so let's all start screaming loudly for our Indigenous men and women that need voices to be heard. K. Sarah, she will be the third and final episode next week, and it will all make sense in the end. And there is a few more things on Henny and Selena's cases that I have found out that I will be incorporating in K. Sarah's episode. And I will talk to you guys next week, and I'm gonna do it again this week. As cliche as it has become, it really is something to remember. See something, say something. You never know who you may be saving. Please, please, please don't be part of the bystander effect. Talk to you next week. Okay, so I told everybody it'd be 3 parts. It's probably going to end up being, well, no, I know for a fact it's going to be 4. If not possibly 5. But I'm going to try and end on 4. So, part 3 of the Bighorn edition. K. Sarah Ruth Stops Pretty Places. She was born August 14th, 2001 to Alan Stops and Geraldine Bulltail. She is a member of the Crow, Northern Cheyenne, Manda, Hadasta, and Arkira. I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly. Apologize if I'm not. K. Sarah was very athletic. She was in basketball, track, softball. She was also in choir and drama. She had inspirations to one day become an actress. She also was very well known by her friends and family for not only having a heart of gold, but she would speak up against wrongdoing. So if someone did something she didn't agree with, she would speak up on their behalf, as she actually did a few days before K. Sarah went missing. She was at the Crow Fair where she was with her 15-year-old brother, who happens to be disabled and he's in a wheelchair. K. Sarah actually filmed the Bighorn law enforcement beating her brother up. She not only filmed it on her camera, but she also uploaded it to social media. So on the 24th of August, just 10 days after K. Sarah had turned 18, she went out with friends. She went out with her one of her friends that was right around her age, and then a couple that were a few years older, and the couple that were older also had a child. So their child, actually, they left their child with Priscilla, who happens to be K. Sarah's aunt, and also of the older couple, the female in that couple, it was her. Priscilla is also her aunt. I'm not sure on the circumstances on if Priscilla and this other girl are related or not, or if it's happens to be that the older girl is Priscilla's niece through marriage on an opposite side, and Priscilla is K. Sarah's aunt on K. Sarah's mother's side, Geraldine. Okay, hopefully you caught that, because that was a lot to comprehend. So they're out in Billings, and the couple, they start arguing. So they're in the street arguing, and the neighbors basically have had enough. So they start setting off their car alarms to try and say, hey, guys, need to stop this, which didn't really work. So the neighbors that were setting off the car alarms, they ended up calling in law enforcement. So when the police department came by, all 4 of K. Sarah, the other girl that was with her and the couple, they all kind of scattered. Eventually, 3 of them came back, but Sarah wasn't found at all. But the child of the couple, Priscilla, was babysitting that night, and Sarah's grandmother, Yolanda Frazier, actually had guardianship of Sarah, but when Sarah would stay in town, she would stay with her Aunt Priscilla because it was just more convenient. So on the 25th of August, Sarah had plans to go with her mom Geraldine Bulltail to North Dakota to visit relatives. But Sarah didn't show up, and she was looking really forward to this. And so they start tracking things, and there was no social activity from Sarah since the 24th, which we all know, 2,000 kids in their social media, if you don't hear or see if it's something they're actively on, you know something's up. So Priscilla, she tries to file a missing persons report, and she's told that there's a waiting period. She was probably told 48 hours before she could report, which we'll get to, but for anybody, it does not matter if somebody is very punctual and they've got a history of being punctual. They run 5 to 10 minutes early, and it's been 2 hours since you haven't heard from them. You can report somebody missing. It doesn't mean 48 hours, because everybody knows by now that those first 48 hours are the most critical. So they finally did put the report in 2 days at the 48 mark, and joggers were jogging past an area, and they came across a body, and it was actually Sarah. But when they called in to report it, the officers showed up, did their thing, or should I say didn't do their thing. We'll get more into that too. I know I'm saying a lot. I'm almost sounding like a broken record here saying we'll get into that. Just trust me, I don't want to jump ahead and then have to come back, because I was doing that a lot in the last couple episodes. So we'll get the jogger's name and the information behind the reports in a little bit. It may not be until next week, but we'll get there, I promise. Priscilla, she actually ends up at the scene where this body has been found, and she asks to see the body, but she's denied by officials to see. So the Bighorn County officers on site, they basically bagged and tagged the body, and they refused to let Priscilla make an identification to confirm if the body was possibly Sarah. And there was never any information given out to the media about a body being found or who it was. And this was on the 29th. So the 31st of August, Sarah's cousin, who would be, I believe, probably like a second cousin, it was the granddaughter of Sarah's grandmother's brother. She ends up reading a tweet on Twitter that a body was found in Hardin, and it is a Sops girl. I apologize. I go back to when I said that they were in Billings. They were actually in Hardin, where the argument between the couple actually happened. That was on me, not you guys. Sorry, I apologize. They're in Hardin. So Yolanda, she ends up calling Priscilla and Geraldine to find out if the tip from the first, or on the first, to see if the tip is legit. So they go, Geraldine and Priscilla, they go to the funeral home to see if the body is Sarah, and they're told it's not her. So they were there on the 1st of September. On the 11th of September, Geraldine and Priscilla are told that the body is positively Sarah, and Yolanda actually finds out from Priscilla, even though Yolanda had guardianship and nobody on Sarah's paternal family side was ever notified by the Bighorn County Sheriff or the Bighorn County Coroner's offices. So now they start going way into, like, we want answers here on what happened. So on September 12th, Geraldine goes back to Bullis Mortuary Funeral Home to have Kaysara's body sent to Dull Funeral Home in Billings, because that's where they wanted the funeral to take place and have a proper burial. However, Terry Bullis recognized that name from Henny's case. Well, Terry, he tells Geraldine that Kaysara has to be cremated. But at the time, her body is still at the Montana Department of Justice Crime Lab in Billings. There's going to be a lot of Billings Hardings back and forth, so if I mess it up, I apologize, and I will do my best to catch myself. And Terry actually tells the family they have to use his funeral home, and then after that, he immediately orders Kaysara's cremation. Kaysara's cremation wasn't even ordered yet until he told them they had to use his. So Terry, a little thing on Terry Bullis is not only does he own the Bullis mortuary, he happens to also be the county coroner, and that plays a factor a little bit later, and I'll get into that today, but we'll get more into it next week. So Grace and Cedar Bulltail, they are Geraldine's sisters. They also show up at the funeral home, and while Geraldine is there trying to make arrangements for Kaysara's visitation and funeral, and Terry tells Grace and Cedar that Kaysara actually died on the 26th of August, and he pretty much accepts the payment from Geraldine for his services that he's demanding they use. Well, later on that day, Yolanda and Alan and other family members go to visit the site where Kaysara was found, but they can't find it because there's been no crime scene tape to be found, and they also stopped at the Bullis mortuary, and it must have been as soon as Geraldine and Cedar and Grace walked out, they closed the doors because they're like, oh, we gotta cover our asses, so we're just gonna close it so we don't have to talk to any more of the Stops family. On September 14th, Alan, who, if we remember, is Kaysara's father, and Yolanda, Kaysara's guardian / grandmother, they find out from relatives that live across the street from where Kaysara was found, and they realize real fast that where Kaysara's body was found, it is really highly trafficked and very highly visible. I've watched a few videos on this, and I've seen the circumstances behind Kaysara are as as mysterious and confusing and speculative as Henny and Selena's cases were when their bodies both were found. So they actually knock on the door of where Kaysara was found, and they asked the owner for permission to do a cultural ceremony where Kaysara's body was found. From my research, where Kaysara was found, it is assumed on my end, I believe it was where Kaysara was found was also the neighbors that were setting off the car alarms. She was found in their backyard, on the other side of a fence in some wooded, not really wooded, but brushed area, like almost like if you got kindling for firewood is kind of where she was found. So they got the permission to do that. And remember the jogger that had found Kaysara? Well, he starts actually talking to Yolanda and Alan, and he's letting them know that he had found her, and he literally watched the police put Kaysara's phone in their pocket, and he made the comment about, why don't you guys charge it and find out who she is? And he also questioned the cops on why they didn't secure the scene, but he was basically given the cold shoulder. Well, on the 14th, Yolanda, well, after she's found all this out, she ends up reaching out to the Deputy Attorney General, Melissa Schlichting, for Sarah's missing persons reports. And when she was told that it was too soon to make a missing persons report, well, actually it was Priscilla that was told she couldn't make a missing persons report because it was too soon and that it had to wait. There was a waiting period. Well, when Yolanda got a hold of Melissa informed her that anyone under 21 is considered a child and that a missing persons report is to be taken as a top priority. So Melissa said she would get the information to Yolanda in a few days. There is a lot that happens in a couple of days. So, and I'm going to do my best to keep you guys on track on the dates. So September 16th, Yolanda and Alan, they go to the visitation for Sarah. However, they get there and there's no Sarah, like no remains. And so September 16th, they have the visitation and Yolanda and Alan go to it. And Sarah's not there. She's nowhere to be found. Like, her ashes have not shown up. And Terry Bullis, his sister, he tells the family that it'll be 45 minutes and that the mortuary is going to be closing soon. However, I really like this family. They force the mortuary to stay open. Well, the family is told that Sarah's ashes probably won't even be there tomorrow for the next day for her funeral. Well, the ashes finally did show up at 5:30, and at this point, Yolanda and Alan are actually unaware that Terry Bullis is not just the mortician, but he's also the county coroner, and that he has all the information in regards to the arrangements. Even though Yolanda had the guardianship and Alan was Sarah's father, he never informs them. Only Sarah's maternal side knew what the hell was going on. So after the visitation, Terry Bullis, he decides to tell the family that the autopsy would take another 3 to 4 weeks and the toxicology findings showed drug and alcohol use, and that he believed the cause of Sarah's death would be exposure to alcohol and substance abuse, and the death certificate would be pending until he received the report. Well, Sarah went missing and she was found in August, so I guess you can't use accidental hypothermia in August as cause of death. Sorry, I got a little bit hot on that one. And I'm going to get probably even more hot in the next part. So on September 18th, Yolanda and Alan, they want all the reports regarding Sarah's case, and they hand deliver multiple notarized requests. So then and they're basically told they're nobodies and whatnot. Okay, maybe I might get this all in one part. I'm sorry. If this is just one part, you guys might be happy, you might not be. So they have sent out, or they've hand delivered their reports or their notarizations that they want the reports regarding Sarah. And I am going to stop there, and we will continue next week into what conspired with the family going to the Billings Gazette. They're meeting with the sheriff's department. What happens with Terry Bullis. There's a few other things that I'm just going to kind of leave you hanging until next week. So like I've said for the last couple of episodes, that my contribution here is just a small voice, and we need to start screaming loudly for Indigenous men and women that need voices to be loud, because they don't have their voices. Some of them that don't have their voices anymore, like Henny, Selena, and Sarah. So I apologize for this one being all over well, it's not really all over the place. I'm having a day, and I needed to get this out. So I will talk to you guys next week, And again, as cliche as it has become, it really is something to remember. See something, say something. You never know who you might be saving. Don't be part of the bystander effect. And it's just because of these, it's not just these 3 cases, but so many times people just stand by assuming somebody else is going to make the call to 911. Someone else recognizes them, and they make the phone call. You just assume, and we all know what assuming does. If you can't figure it out, look it up on Google. I'm sure you can find the answer to that. You guys have a great week, and I'll talk to you guys next week with conclusion. Hey everyone, I'm hoping you guys are doing great this evening, morning, whenever you're listening to this. So I'm going to kind of jump right into this where I left off, because there's a little more that happened on September 18th. After Yolanda and Alan, they hand-delivered their notarized request for all the reports regarding Sarah. So Yolanda had also called the Billings Gazette, and she spoke with the reporter Juliana Sukit, and she was wondering why there was no media coverage on Sarah over the last 22 days. Well, Juliana, she ended up apologizing to Yolanda and basically let her know that the paper wasn't notified about a body being found, nor that a body had even been identified, even though the Gazette calls the Bighorn Sheriff's Department daily for any updates. So that was the reason that Sarah was never made public by the Billings Gazette, because they were never notified. So now on the 19th, Yolanda, Alan, and other family members met with the investigator, Officer Mike Fuss, after they had made multiple attempts to speak or to meet with him. So Officer Mike Fuss is not just an everyday officer. He happens to also be the captain. So on the 19th, Yolanda and Alan, they finally get to meet him, like I just said. And Captain Fuss, he's not quite sure why Yolanda and Alan are even there to talk to him. So he's under the assumption that they're there to talk about a cell phone found near the dump site. Okay, I am calling it a dump site because I don't believe that Sarah died where she was found, because that's whatever happened to Sarah. She was dumped there. She didn't just die there. That's just my opinion, but to be politically correct, it would be at the crime scene. So Yolanda ends up informing Captain Fuss that she is Sarah's legal guardian and that she has the documentation to prove it. However, Captain Fuss, he's under the impression that Priscilla was Sarah's guardian. So when Yolanda corners him, she's like, well, did Priscilla show you any documentation? Captain Fuss, he decides to change his wording on how he answers the question. He's like, I was under the impression that Priscilla was Sarah's mother. So Yolanda, she basically, now that she has Captain Fuss in person, she kind of starts her own interrogation of the police department. And I feel at this point she's got every right to. She starts off asking why he hadn't contacted her back or any of the family's calls. His response was that he was busy with other cases and that he didn't have time to return the phone calls. Then she asks about the crime scene not being secured or taped off. When he tells Yolanda that since the investigator got there before the police, then the police don't have to secure the crime scene. It's only when the police get there before the investigators that the crime scene needs to be secured. which really doesn't make any sense to me. But so Yolanda, she continues with her questioning. She wants to know why no one charged Sarah's phone to look at Sarah's most recent communications. Well, Captain Fuss, he was pretty shocked, and he was surprised that they even knew that the phone was dead. And he proceeds to tell Yolanda that they couldn't get into that kind of phone, and that even the FBI couldn't break into that type of phone. So Yolanda and Alan, they sign a release of information form and get Sarah's cell phone back, and they sign the release of information so that the officers could have access to Sarah's social media accounts. Now Captain Fuss, he's a little fussy about this. He tells Yolanda that he has taken over the investigation because the original investigator, Jeremy Middlestead, and this is in a direct quote, couldn't handle it. So, and Captain Fuss, he keeps talking, and the events that happened the day of Sarah's visitation do end up coming to light. He tells Yolanda that Terry Bullis had snatched the body from the crime lab, and that he had to get it back and take it back to the crime lab. This explains why Bullis' sister was so defensive the day of the visitation, because the body had been taken back to the crime lab by a police escort. And Terry Bullis' sister was not going to let the family know that they screwed up. So now the family tells Captain Fuss that they have a $5,000 reward for any information, and Fuss, he seems pretty angry about it, and he basically insinuates that Sarah died of alcohol poisoning and that she died at the spot she was found, which goes back to my comment saying about the dump site earlier. My personal belief, what they're telling happened did not happen, but that's just personally on my end. And then he adds in that Sarah was found at 6:43 p.m., not in the morning, as the newspaper had insinuated. So if the newspaper had insinuated it, but it was the day before that Yolanda had just gotten a hold of the newspaper and they hadn't known anything about it, somebody's telling stories. So Yolanda and Alan, they now have a notarized request for all mortuary reports regarding Sarah that they end up giving to Terry Bullis. So while Yolanda and Alan are having their meeting with Captain Fuss, this is where the other family members that are there, which would be Grace and Cedar Bulltail, Sarah's aunts, they're meeting with the Big Horn County Attorney Jay Harris and Liaison Giovanni Buffalo. I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly. So Jay Harris tells Grace he's not really sure who in the sheriff's department is leading the investigation because of the reorganization and general turmoil over there. Now, as I go through this, it will get very confusing on really who is running the show on the case, because there's a lot of different people that say they're running. Then there's people that are added in to help and whatnot. So Jay Harris, he also points out that not only does Terry Bullis have a potential conflict of interest being the county coroner and the owner of the funeral home, but also has a habit as a county coroner to quickly determine cause of death as either alcohol related or natural causes. If you've listened to the other 3 parts, anybody else's mind just automatically go to accidental hypothermia? Well, that doesn't apply in August, now does it? Anyhow, at this point, the family wants to know why no family has been asked for basic information, such as Kay Sarah's phone number, who her service provider is, or anything like that. And Grace isn't getting a clear answer when she's asking whether the investigators are looking into Kay Sarah's social media accounts. Well, Harris gives her a scowling look, and he remarks saying, "How do you know that nothing's being done?" Okay, so that question or remark could actually be taken two different ways. It can be taken as, like, do you know something I don't know, and how do you know that nothing's being done? Or it could be taken as, well, they may be doing something and they're just not saying anything, so how would you know if there is nothing being done? So, I'm saying so a lot, I'm sorry. September 21st, Sheriff Lawrence Big Hair, he meets Cedar at her house to let her know that Terry Bullis had taken Kay Sarah's body, or snatched her body, from the crime lab in Billings several times, and that Kay Sarah's body had to be taken back to the crime lab for further analysis. At the end of this, I have a comment about that, but we'll wait till the end. Now, also on the 21st, the Deputy Attorney General, Melissa Schlichting, she notifies Yolanda that there was never a missing child report filed, or that Kay Sarah had ever been put in the missing persons database. And from the 21st to the 26th, there was candlelit vigils and marches that were held in Kay Sarah's honor, and not just Kay Sarah's, but they were also held in Selena Not Afraid's case also. They were honoring both of them. So on the 26th of September, Yolanda and Alan try to get Kay Sarah's death certificate for the second time. And they get a runaround between the Bighorn County clerk and recorder and Terry Bullis. The clerk and recorder tells Yolanda that she needs details related to the death required for the application that Bullis has to provide. And Bullis basically tells Yolanda and Alan that it's not worth seeking the death certificate yet, since it'll say pending investigation. But he does give them the proper paperwork to fill out this application. But when Alan and Yolanda turn the application into the clerk and recorder's office, the deputy clerk, she hands them back the application several times and says that Terry Bullis handles the death certificates. And then after the back and forth, she finally admits to them that she had never handled a case like this. So Yolanda and Alan, they send the application in via certified mail with payment to make damn sure that it's received. So at this point, I'm thinking Yolanda is not one you want to mess with. This woman is going to get answers whether you like the questions she has for you or not. You're going to answer her questions. So now the next day, the 27th of September, Yolanda, she's up to her own little sneaky little things to do. She calls her son Justin, and she wants him to call the hotline with a tip. Because as far as she's concerned, the hotline cannot be trusted, and it's basically a big joke. So Justin does, and is told he can't give his tip to the dispatcher because there isn't an officer to take the call, and the officer has to hear the tip directly. The dispatcher takes Justin's information and is told that someone will call around 7 p.m. But Justin doesn't receive a call until 9:30 that night. And guess who from? No other than Officer Jeremy Middlestead. Like I said, we don't know who is in charge of this investigation. There's not really much information on what tip Justin gave Officer Jeremy Middleston. It's just that he was I think they were trying to see if he'd actually call back and how it was going to work. So on the 30th of September, Yolanda and Alan, they meet again with Sheriff Big Hair. Only this time, Under Sheriff Clinton Iron is present with him. So they inform Yolanda and Alan that they knew on August 29th that the body found was possibly Sarah's, and that the biological father, Alan, and legal guardian, Yolanda, should have been notified. But he also blames Terry Bullis for moving Sarah's body from the crime lab to the funeral home and back. Yolanda, in all Yolanda fashion, she lets Sheriff Big Hair know that she is aware of Bullis's previous trouble with the state board. And again, she wants to know why the FBI wasn't involved. Well, Sheriff Big Hair, he says that the family can have the FBI involved if they want them to be. So, and he also instructs them to write up a statement about the meeting with Officer Fuss on the 19th. And he also lets the family know that he signed the family up with a victim advocate that would update them about the case. Okay, so that victim advocate happens to be the liaison Giovanni Buffalo. So, moving on to September 30th, I'm going to throw another aunt in there, into this mix. So, this is going to make 4 aunts that Sarah has on her side. And I'm going to introduce now to you Tiffany Glenn. She reaches out to the FBI and requests an investigation into her niece's death. Now, remember what we said in part 1 about jurisdictional nightmare. So when she wants them to look into it, she more or less gets a runaround about needing more evidence that confirms that Sarah was murdered on the reservation before they could conduct an investigation. But there's no evidence that Sarah was murdered off the reservation either. We don't know if she was murdered on the reservation, off the reservation, who murdered her, how she ended up where she was at. I'm going to move on before I get completely upset. So, remember Bighorn attorney Jay Harris? Well, on October 1st, he has a news release and announces the creation of the Bighorn County Missing and Murdered Persons and Investigation Task Force. Harris indicates that the task force will involve, quote, active case studies and policy review agencies at all levels, from local and tribal all the way to state and federal partners, unquote. Anybody else figure out what exactly that means? Because it sounds like, I'm going to say this so it sounds important and you can figure it out. Active case studies and policy review agencies at all levels. What exactly are we doing? So a week goes by. We're on to the 7th of October. I feel really bad for this family because they've gone through a couple months of hell just trying to get really a couple answers. So on the 7th of October, Yolanda, she calls the victim liaison Buffalo with the number she had gotten from Sheriff Big Hair, and she gets a voicemail and she leaves a message and didn't hear anything from her. So the next day she emails her a list of questions about Sarah's case. So later that day, victim liaison Buffalo calls back saying that Yolanda was given her office number and that she's in Billings for training over the next week, and that she would work on getting the answers to Yolanda's questions. Well, Devani, she also informs Yolanda that Officer Crookshank has been assigned to assist Captain Fuss with Sarah's case. Once again, we have another officer involved in this case. When asked about the autopsy report, Yolanda is told that the autopsy report isn't generally given out to the family, but she could ask for the coroner's report, which we all know right now that's not going to go very far because Terry Bullis has that. And he's got his ways of what is supposed to be on that report. And then she also asks why Captain Fuss replaced Officer Middlestead. Well, Devani basically says he's the captain and he takes all the big cases. So if you're the captain, you're going to take the big cases because you get the credit. Heaven forbid we'd let one of our younger, not younger, but, well, possibly younger, but one of just our everyday officers handle a big case. So the 16th, so Kaysera's family members, they submit a request for criminal justice information for all inquiries. Grace, she sends a letter wanting the police report, the missing persons report, the list of witnesses interviewed, and the coroner's report, and she wants them sent to the family attorney. None of the information ever was released to the family or their legal counsel. The county attorney never returned any emails to the family, including the ones that requested to meet with him. And that was on the 16th of October. Now, on the 21st of October, Yolanda and Alan, they finally send their letter to Sheriff Lawrence Bighorn about their meeting on the September 19th with Captain Fuss, and that they felt they weren't being taken seriously, and that Kaysera's death was just a joke to the unit, and that they weren't properly investigating it. As of February 25th, 2020, there has not been any response regarding Yolanda's letter pertaining to that meeting. So on the 29th, Yolanda submits a formal request for criminal justice information to the Bighorn County attorneys. So when she submits this formal request to the criminal justice information, she wants specific questions answered regarding the circumstances of Kaysera's murder, and tips that the family have received from the community, because apparently the police department doesn't get these tips, because when you call the tip hotline, you can only leave a tip with an officer, not a dispatcher that takes the phone call. So what's the point in having the dispatcher answering the calls? And again, as of the February 25th, 2020, there's not been a response. So let's jump ahead a little bit, because between the 29th of October and the 19th of November, there's just a lot of protest and candlelit vigils and stuff going on for Kaysera and the justice that she deserves, the justice that Selena deserves, the justice Henny deserves, the justice all of these Indigenous women deserve. So on the 19th, Yolanda, she ends up calling the FBI seeking assistance, and she receives no response, so she leaves her message. So Yolanda and Alan, once again, are meeting with the Bighorn County attorney, Jay Harris. This time, Mr. Harris isn't so nice. He acts pretty defensive throughout the whole meeting with them, because Yolanda wants to know why that no official had ever interviewed her or Alan, whether Kaysera was healthy or what kind of health she had or anything at all. And Harris pretty much folds his arms and tells Yolanda he doesn't feel comfortable and doesn't know what he can meet with, if he can meet with the family anymore, and he doesn't know what more he can tell them. Well, Yolanda, she tells Harris that the media release highlighting his role over all the suspicious deaths and homicides, which is why she had initially sought him out for a meeting, because to her, it didn't seem like any of the sheriffs or the investigating officers had any answers, or they were actually doing anything about Sarah's murder. Well, Mr. J. Harris, he is really offended that Yolanda even used the term murder when she refers to Sarah's death. And when Yolanda's asking about why she hadn't received any of these reports that they hand-delivered notarized reports for, why she hadn't received any of them back, well, Harris tells her that a special form is needed, and that would be why they hadn't gotten anything back. And so Yolanda, she ends up filing the form during the meeting, and then Mr. J. Harris, he confirms Yolanda's worst nightmare. But she's asking questions, she wants answers. He actually tells her that there was a gap in the active investigation in Sarah's case. So the first week that Sarah's body was found, and the investigation actually ended up halting due to personal issues. So there was no officer assigned to her case after Officer Jeremy Middlestead recused himself from the case. Okay, so what did he recuse himself? Was he made to go somewhere else because Captain Fuss wanted the case because it was a big case because he was captain? Was it because Terry Bullis kept taking the body and Officer Middlestead got sick and tired of having to go back and get the body? So which one is it? I would like to know just as much as you guys. So the next day, Grace, she ends up reaching out to the Montana State Crime Lab in Missoula. I have been there. I should know how to pronounce this. Missoula. Pretty sure that's how you pronounce it. I've driven through Missoula. And she is told that the autopsy report is not complete, and it could take 12 to 16 weeks to be completed. And she's also told that the autopsy was conducted on the 27th, but Sarah wasn't reportedly found until the 29th. So everything kind of calms, not so much calms down, quiets down. Yolanda's not quite questioning everybody on the force anymore for about the next month. They're attending in Lame Deer. They're seeking resources to help get justice for Sarah from the Department of Justice, MIP, Missing Indigenous Persons. Let's go to December 18th, 2019. So Terry Bullis is back in this again. So Grace, she asks about the progress of the coroner's report. Well, Bullis tells Grace that he did tell Geraldine, Sarah's mother, that Sarah's remains had to be cremated and for her to be returned back to the family. Well, Grace is wondering, well, was that the only way? Well, Terry Bullis, he doesn't say it was the only way. He says it was the simplest and easiest way to have the remains handled. He just didn't want to do his job, or he had done his job, but he wasn't going to let anybody else know he did his job. Accidental hypothermia. I might just call this episode accidental hypothermia because I keep saying it. So I'm not, if I have a giggle here and there, it is not I find this case funny. I find it very stressful and very, I laugh to not cry and not to scream. So I'm not trying to be disrespectful at all if it comes off that way. I'm sorry. So Bullis, he tells Grace that now that everything with Sarah's case is in the county attorney's hands, that's where they need to go because he has nothing to do with it anymore. So Grace asks him about the autopsy report since it had been 16 weeks since it had been completed. And he blatantly tells Grace that he has other cases that have been out way longer than that. Well, when Grace tells him that she paid Terry Bullis for his services and that she has a right to obtain the information from him, he has a very bad habit of not just quickly putting down alcohol-related or natural causes, but he also has a really bad habit of using his county coroner position and his business owner of a mortuary business interchangeably when they work for his advantage. And he tells Grace that the funeral home was paid for the funeral home services, nothing else, because he uses his interchangeable county coroner and business owner whenever it is convenient for him to avoid accountability. So later that day, there was another protest for justice for Sarah. It was held on the Big Horn County Courthouse steps. So right now, I have gone through all of this, and I'm discovering there's only one person that is actually on this family side, and that is Melissa Schlichting. So Grace actually reaches out to Melissa, and she had written several letters to the Attorney General's office. And so Melissa, she actually finds out that the date of the autopsy was actually August 30th, 2019, not the 27th, as the family had been told by the Montana Department of Justice Forensic Science Division. Melissa, she also didn't know that whether an official autopsy report would be complete or had been completed, that it would be released to the family. So Grace, she lets Melissa know that the family was receiving no information from the Bighorn County officials and wanted the Montana DOJ for the information that they could provide to the family and the legal counsel of the family. So Melissa, she states that the DOJ works to assist criminal justice efforts directly to the county officials in the state, not to the legal counsel or the family or the family. But again, Grace, she's asking for a meeting with Attorney General Fox to meet with the family members. So Melissa states that she's going to set up this meeting. Nobody's been contacted. So that's as much information that is really out there on case Sarah. There is a lot of information because it's been a few years. We are now into 2023. So just a little bit of a recap here. So we went through the difference between the Crow and the Cheyenne tribes. The night Henny went missing. The night Selena went missing. The night... Oh, it wasn't even a night Selena went missing. Selena went missing during the middle of the day, around 2 in the afternoon. All three of these girls were found where they were last seen. But when they were looked for, they weren't there. Which makes me wonder, where did they go between the time that they went missing and the time they were found? Because I'm pretty sure they were not abducted by aliens and put back down. So this is where I'm going to come to the end of this. 3 young girls, they Their lives were cut way too short. Henny, she wanted to be a doctor, and her dream was taken from her on December 7th, 2018. Selena, she wanted to become an Indian relay rider and own her own farm one day, and her dream was taken from her January 1st, 2020. Sarah, she wanted to one day be an actress, and her dream was taken from her sometime between August 24th, 26th, 2019. So now that we've all learned a bit about the indigenous tribes, the Crow and the Cheyenne, we've gone through the many details of the cases of Henny Scott, Selena Not Afraid, and Sarah Stops Pretty Places. I do want to bring up something with Selena's case about part 2. If in any way, shape, or form, when I brought up the part of COVID being the start of COVID and why Selena was even anywhere, it may have very well sounded like I was victim blaming it. I was not trying to come across that way, and I apologize if it did come across that way. With everything with these 3 girls, I'm sure we can all make our own assumptions as to what is going on in Bighorn County. There's a lot of things that don't make sense, but make sense if you can read between the lines. So let's start yelling out for the injustice. Let's start raising our voices. Let's not be part of the bystander effect. Let's start saying something when we see something. Guys, have a great day.